I'm Scott Hamilton, Rockfile, back with another podcast review for you. Well, not really a view. This will be a discussion like a couple I've done recently about an album. Hunting High and Low by Aha, released on this day, October 28th, 1985. As I've discussed in many podcasts, I grew up a huge music fan. I love buying albums, recording the radio, singing a little bit, playing flutophone, eventually being told I couldn't be a drummer and picking up trumpet, just music. And I always loved rock music. My parents got me into a hard diet growing up of Paul McCartney, Joe Cocker, Rod Stewart, the early stuff, the rockin' stuff. And eventually, when my taste got into Rush and Yes and Zeppelin and you know, the heavier stuff later on. But I always liked good pop music. I wore silly 80s dance clothes when it was a teen night at a real dance club, and we had to drink Coca-Colas, but we looked like adults with our skinny ties and stuff. I did all that stuff. And so there was pop music, alternative music, dance music, all that kind of stuff in the 80s that I was digging along with my Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and Prince, you know. So I had gotten into Aha when they released Hunting High and Low on cassette. Yeah, that was my preferred choice of music at the time because I could listen to it at home. I could listen to it in the car. I couldn't make really good tapes with the stereo I had at the time. I would record albums on a cassette and they would sound terrible because it was a crappy cassette deck. So it was just easier to buy the cassette. And I had listened to this album a lot. It was a haunting interesting. Everybody thinks of Take On Me, but when you listen to the rest of the album, it's very much almost in a Cure vein of pop music. Some of the stuff is quite haunting in its in the compositions and what they're saying. So this new wave synth pop album I had been listening to quite a bit, and I was getting into audiophile stuff. I had put a Blaupunk stereo into the Toyota when I went off to college, and I was going to these high-end, even though I didn't have money, I was going to these high-end stereo shops and listening to superior albums in very expensive turntables and things like that. And CDs were coming out, CD players, and one of the guys at one of these stereo shops recommended that I buy a couple of CDs of recordings that I was very, very familiar with and take those CDs in when I auditioned CD players. Now, he didn't realize I was going to do this and go to like a Circuit City and look at players that were $100 and $150 instead of his $500 and $600 deals. But I took that to heart, and that's what I did. I bought 2 CDs, and it turns out I also had to have my wisdom teeth taken out at this time. So I bought these 2 CDs, and one was Aha's Hunting High and Low. That was the first compact disc I literally bought. They came in these long boxes, these cardboard boxes that were very long so they could fit in the same bins with the albums. And I also bought Holst the Planets, which was one of my favorite classical pieces. Being a trumpet player for the last few years, I had gravitated towards those big, bombastic, trumpet-filled, fanfare-type pieces of music. And those were the 2 CDs that when I went to Circuit City and some of the other places that were selling budget CD players at the time in these early, I would put those CDs in the players in their listening rooms and I would listen to them. And the idea that I was originally told by the stereo guy was because you know the recording so well, you will hear the differences, how better it sounds on CD and how different it sounds on different players. So I picked, I think it was a Pioneer, and it didn't even have much of a display. It literally had a 2-digit LED display that went 01, 02, 03. It didn't have a time display or any of that. It was just a CD player. And I remember it was a bit pricey. And so I had ordered it, and we picked up the CD player on the way home from me getting all 4 of my wisdom teeth taken out. So I had these giant chipmunk cheeks, and I was going to be stuck in the house for several days while my mouth healed and couldn't really do much. So all I did for a few days was listen to Aha's Hunting High and Low and Holst the Planets. Still have both CDs. They still both sound great today. Holst was a fully digital recording, and Aha was a great transfer at the time. I believe there's a rematch. Yeah, they just did an anniversary edition, a 25th anniversary edition, I believe, or it's coming out. So the group went on to, they were nominated for the Best New Grammy in 1986. They were the first Norwegian band to be nominated for a Grammy, and they've had quite a long career since. Oh, that's right. They did remaster it and re-release it about 10 years ago, so it's due. But anyway, they came back to resurgence last year when they released that acoustic version of this song, of the big song, And Take On Me has always been a classic, but that version that he still has the voice and that they did a haunting acoustic version of it was so impressive. But anyway, this album kicked off a love affair. I was into a-ha for their entire careers. They released some really great albums. Being in rock radio and then being on Warner Brothers, I could get the label to send it to me, even though they know I wasn't going to play it. So I have just about everything a-ha's ever put out, and I still go back to this album. It still sounds great, and it still takes me back. But today is the anniversary of its release, and I just had to take a minute and say, wow, it really, this was a game changer for me because I didn't listen to a whole lot of this. I was very much a singles guy in 1985. I mean, albums when it came to rock and Prince and things like that, but singles for everything else. Because I was starting to work on the radio, and singles were important to the radio, and always had been because I grew up on Casey Kasem's Top 40. But singles were usually how I discovered great bands. I bought a lot of albums that I didn't like, based on a single. But this was one that I bought based on a single. I bought it on cassette, later bought it on CD because I love the album so much, and still, to this day, love this album. Yep, you wouldn't expect it, but I'm a a-ha fan. So check it out if you haven't listened to it ever or not in a long time. This was a big album back then, went on to sell 11 million units. Check out Hunting High and Low from a-ha. It's a modern classic. It stood the test of time, so check it out. I'm Scott Hamilton. I'm Rockfile. My website is therockfile.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Thanks for sharing and subscribing. It's all very important in modern times, and I really appreciate you. Wouldn't be here without you.